Okay, right here is what I'm reading, and we're at part 2, story 6, A Gleam of Hope. Move the mouse out of the way. How far Adam and Eve wandered from their Eden home, we were not told, but they soon noticed many changes. For one thing, they found out that they needed clothes. And we read that the Lord God made coats of skin and clothed them. What wonderful coats these must have been, made with all the skill, all the thoughtfulness, all the tender pity of man's creator. That's what it says. Yet these coats meant death. All, at least one animal, probably two, had to die that Adam and Eve might live. And so the cost of sin was brought home to them again. Many times in our journeys, we might have talked, okay, many times on our journeys, they may have talked of the good old days they had enjoyed in the gorgeous paradise God had given them at the beginning. Many times, too, they must have wondered whether whether they would ever be allowed to see it again. And of course, no illustration. Next page. One gleam of hope. Big, big thing. But let me show this nice, beautiful painting by Russell Harlan. That's on this one page. That's the one, the illustration. Nice, beautiful. Looks like an oil painting to me. I'm just going by the art skills that I got. Okay, the caption on it says, besides painting by Russell Harlan, Adam and Eve often talked about the promise God made to them just before they were driven out of the Garden of Eden. Eve clearly remembered how God cursed the serpent and why. And that was the illustration. Now let's go back to the story. It says, one gleam of hope. As again and again they went over all that had happened on that sad day when they had made their terrible mistake, one thing kept coming back to their minds. It was God. It was something God had said to the serpent. Over and over they repeated it, wondering just what it really meant. They will put enmity, E-N-M-I-T-Y. Put an enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seeds and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. King James, really buggy. Like I said, this is a lot of peppered in with King James. Whatever could this mean? One thing was certain. It meant Eve would have children, and she was glad of that. But how much more did it mean? Well, there would be an enmity or war between Eve's children and the serpent's children. Eve knew that would never forgive. Eve knew that she would never forgive the serpent for the way that he deceived her and robbed her of a loving home. Nor would her children. She would see to that. And surely, when God said to the serpent that it shall bruise thy head, it meant that her seed, her children, the one or one of them would win the conflict at least. Here's the first time she saw a gleam of hope. Someday, the wicked serpent who had brought such sorrow and loss upon her and her husband would be destroyed. Then perhaps God would let them back into Eden. Interesting. I hadn't read this in a real long time, so I'm reading it word for word. And 1953. Interesting. Let's get back. How they both loved this promise. It was the first promise ever made to man, and the first one mentioned in the Bible. To Adam and Eve, it was the only promise they had had, and how precious it was to have been to them. On dark days when everything seemed to go wrong, they remembered it and walked about and talked about. And no illustration. It till hope sprang up in their hearts, in their sorrowing hearts once more. You can imagine how eager they looked forward to having their first baby. Perhaps he would be the one, when he grew up, to bruise the serpent's head. Perhaps he would have to, perhaps they wouldn't have to wait very long to return to Eden after all. But when Cain was born, he did not crush the serpent's head. Instead, he turned out to be a big disappointment. Nor did Abel or Seth or any of their children fulfill the promise. So the years went by, and still no one came to restore them to paradise and the tree of life. It must have been hard to keep on hoping. What was it like the Lord had in his mind? He made the promise in the garden. To whom did he refer when he spoke of the seed of the woman? I was thinking, of course, of his son, and how one day he would come to earth as a baby, one of his children, and fight the great enemy himself. Oh, now it's starting to get interesting. And here's where some stuff will probably get a little crazy. As Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, God with us, he would destroy Satan and bring Adam and Eve and all who love God back to Eden. Of course, if you had to say to Adam and Eve, you will have to wait thousands of years before you see their home again, they would have been much discouraged. So he told them, so he just told, yeah, he had told them just enough to let them know what it would be, that all would be well at last. It cheered their poor, saddened hearts and led them to keep on hoping. And men have passed on the same blessed hope from one to another down the ages. This is how it came about that all the people who God loved, even in those far off places, began looking forward to the coming of Jesus. This is why Enoch, the seventh of Adam, said, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all. That day, the same hope is ours. Everywhere, boys and girls who love Jesus are looking eagerly for his return. From when he comes, the promise that God made to Adam will be fulfilled, and the old serpent called the devil will be destroyed. Then too, Eden, beautiful, gorgeous, glorious Eden, will be restored, and the children of God will live there in perfect happiness forever. And yes, there is an illustration of a boy and a girl seeing all the angels. And it looks like a watercolor. And of course, I'm going to tell you what I think it looks like. Okay, and that was part 2, story 6, and now we go to part 2, story 7. And we'll be in a bit.